The European Union has this huge and honestly pretty controversial goal to build one single seamless market out of 27 different countries. But how on earth do you do that when every single country has its own way of doing things, its own set of rules? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break down the EU's very clever answer.
Let's kick things off with a story. It's about a French liqueur called Cassis de Dijon. For years, you just couldn't buy it in Germany. And the reason why is super interesting. It wasn't some big tax or an outright ban. Nope, it was a tiny little technicality, one that actually opens up a perfect window into the entire logic of the EU's single market.
And that story, it gets right to the heart of the problem the EU's single market was built to solve. How do you possibly deal with the thousands of different national rules that can act like invisible walls for trade between countries? Okay, so here was the deal. Germany had a law that said for any drink to be sold as a liqueur, it had to have at least 25% alcohol. Simple enough. But Cassis de Dijon, which is super popular in France, only has about 15 to 20%. So, under German law, no go. Now, Germany's argument was, hey, we're just protecting our consumers. But what it really did was create a barrier, stopping a French product from getting on their shelves.
And a barrier like that, it flies right in the face of the whole point of the EU's internal markets. If you look at Article 26 of the EU's main treaty, it defines the market as an area without internal frontiers. That German rule, no matter how good the intention, was basically acting like a border, right where there isn't supposed to be one.
So what happened next? Well, this whole thing ended up in court, the European Court of Justice, to be exact. A German importer who really wanted to sell the liqueur decided to sue, and the court's decision? It completely changed the game for how the EU market operates. And let me tell you, the court's ruling was a big deal. They essentially said there was no valid reason to block a product that was already legally made and sold in another member country. And this gave birth to a really powerful idea, something we call the principle of mutual recognition. Okay, so here's the bottom line. If a product is perfectly safe and legal for people in France, it should be considered just as safe and legal for people in Germany or Italy or anywhere else in the EU. Suddenly, the tables returned. A country can only block a product if they can prove, and I mean really prove, that it's absolutely necessary to protect something vital, like public health.
But, okay, what happens when just recognizing each other's rules isn't going to cut it? I mean, think about really complex stuff, like cars or medicines. Having 27 different sets of safety standards would be total chaos. For that, the EU pulls out its ultimate tool: harmonization. So, harmonization, it's basically a two-step move. Think of it like this. First, you deregulate. You clear out that tangled web of 27 different national rulebooks. Then, you re-regulate. You create one single common EU standard that applies to everybody. It's that simple. You go from 27 sets of rules down to just one. And the legal power for all this, the engine that drives it, that comes from Article 114 of the EU Treaty. It gives the EU the authority to align, or approximate, as they call it, the laws of member states, whenever it's needed to make the single market actually work. But of course, this creates a huge point of tension, right? I mean, what if that new single EU rule is, well, weaker than a country's old rule? Can a country that has, say, really high environmental standards be forced to lower them just for the sake of the market? Well, the treaty actually has a couple of escape hatches built right in for these kinds of situations. Under that same Article 114, a country can apply for an exception. They can ask permission to keep their own stricter national rules after a new EU law is passed, or they can ask to introduce a brand new rule if there's new scientific proof of a specific local problem. And believe me, these powers were put to the ultimate test in one of the most high-stakes arenas you can imagine: tobacco. A whole series of legal battles over EU-wide tobacco laws brought this entire debate into crystal clear focus. So Germany basically threw down the gauntlet. They challenged an EU-wide ban on tobacco advertising. Their argument was pretty clever. They said, hey, are you guys really trying to fix a trade problem here? Or are you just using the single market as a smokescreen to legislate on public health, which is supposed to be our job? It's a great question. Was it a legitimate single market move or an overreach of EU power? So what did the court say? Well, they sided with the EU. They basically said, look, these two things aren't at war with each other. Their logic was that since all these different national advertising rules were creating trade barriers for magazines and TV channels that cross borders, it was a valid single market problem. But here's the kicker. The court also pointed out that when the EU harmonizes rules, it has to aim for a high level of health protection. So yes, a single market law could absolutely be used to achieve a major public health goal.
And all of this, it really brings us to the core tension at the heart of the entire EU single market project. This isn't something that's just settled and done. It's a dynamic, constant, ongoing negotiation.
It really is a constant balancing act. You've got the balance between different ways of harmonizing rules, the political push and pull between the EU and the member states. But the big one, the most important one, is the balance between the goal of a totally open, barrier-free market on one side and all the other vital things a country cares about on the other, like public health and protecting the environment. This is the never-ending debate over where you draw the line between EU power and national power. So here's the big takeaway. The central question that the EU is always trying to answer is this. In this massive drive to create one giant, efficient market, how much space do you leave for individual nations to set their own unique standards to protect their own citizens and their own environment? There is no easy answer. And that debate, well, it's shaping Europe every single day.